integral theories, philosophies, and practices, but whatever. Let's get back to the difference between structures of consciousness, levels of consciousness, states of consciousness, and whatever we can attach to consciousness in the different works of the integral theorists we've been exploring so far. So last time I was rambling about the differences between the structures of consciousness as they're described by Gebser and the levels of consciousness as they're expressed by Ken Wilber. So Ken Wilber basically took a bunch of different mostly developmental models, in which he included the work of Gebser, for instance. While in many ways Gebser's structures are not really something we could tie to the developmental field. So I'll try to express it in a more accurate manner than I did last time. So state of consciousness is the present transparency or present conditions of the filters that allow for the light of consciousness to shine through, shine in, or express out. It's clarified now. So, what do I mean by that? So I mentioned the analogy of a bubble on the ocean of consciousness. The consciousness there being all that can be, and so that a thing can be, it needs to be known in one way or another. I do not mean, it doesn't mean to be known as we humans would think of knowing, but it needs to be able to imprint its effect to cause a change in other beings around. It needs memory. If something has no memory at all, although things could be existing all around, if you had no memory, or if things had no memory, they would just arise and disappear. The actual feeling of duration, the feeling of existence, of being, is innately tied to the idea of memory, which is the imprint, the tracking of events, imprinting on the Korah, on the receiving darkness, the receiving material, receiving substrate, a substance, what stands below. It's quite interesting too that substance and understanding share the same common meaning, just with the prefix being Latin in one, sub, and being in English in the other. And we can understand what we perceive. So it doesn't mean we understand all the things we perceive, but we cannot understand something we do not perceive. And now we can understand something that we perceive and that left an impression on us, sufficient for us to ponder upon it and make sense of it. if a track appears on a background that doesn't keep an impression of it, like the air, billions of tracks have appeared and disappeared in the air, and maybe at least some type of senses are able to track the its signature in the air, or the chemical signature, like dogs can do, or like humans can do at a much lower level, but maybe like elephants can do. But visually, we are not able to follow tracks in substrates that are of too light density. And so, to understand something, it needs to have left an imprint in our mental substrate. And this imprint we call memory, before it can be called understanding. It will have to be memory. So, the state of consciousness is the present conditions of my substrate. And I proposed the analogy of a bubble with the idea that the actual core of the bubble was still the infinite and definite, was still the boundless, undifferentiated, unmanifested, infinite potentiality of Wuji, or maybe we could relate it to the archaic in some way. Around it, the archaic would not be the proper expression there. It would be just one aspect of the archaic. It would be the void aspect. Right around the void aspect is the infinity of the manifested, and the infinity of all things that can be known. So all things that can leave an impression on whatever other things. This is the entire field that I call consciousness. And as a undifferentiated unity, this field is what I mentioned. It can be pictured as a field with the exact same information spread out everywhere, exact same density of something you could call energy, maybe even something you could call matter and information, but just the ideas here only that it's completely homogeneous, with no difference whatsoever. Hence, no, if you could picture any type of, you can imagine any type of force being applied there, so that any force is applied preferably to one direction than the other, you need imbalance, you need a tension or difference in potential. If the potentialities are completely spread out, if all things have the exact same potentiality of being, none can arise, because the expression of the arising or the manifestation of one would mean right away the negation of others. So there's this paradox that the absolute spread and equality of potentiality in a field would mean the complete inability to actualize any of it. So this would be the manifested, the one. And the one as an unfolding differentiation enabling perception, enabling actualization, realization, manifestation, hence perception, hence memory, understanding, and all that. All the things we assign to consciousness as an active phase. It would be the other aspect of unity. So unity not as oneness, undifferentiated, but unity as a sum of smaller unities. So this oneness, this big whole, is not homogeneous anymore. It is the sum total of the infinitely diverse expressions of it, or differentiations of it, that are due to these ripples in the sea of consciousness. These apparent movements creating perturbations that create small what's the name in English? So encapsulation of the boundless air, like the infinite indefinite, into the water of the manifested, of this not of the manifested, but of the potential waters of consciousness, of this unity of potentialities. And this further is a specific name in biology that eludes me right now, but these encapsulations of more and more, so the bubble becomes in itself, first picture, first a folding of the sea, it's a small looping over itself and enclosing a border, while capturing a piece of pieces, a picture, because a piece of nothing is still nothing. It's picture a bubble of air being wrapped around by a thin layer of water and creating foam, creating this bubble. Inside the bubble is yet another universe unfolding. So inside, as I mentioned, you'd still find again the infinite indefinite, and the infinite indefinite would still contain the definite and the finite, which otherwise would be its inner negation. And inside this finite, you would have the homogeneous unity, which is akin to nothingness, and its other potentiality, the manifested, the expressed, the differentiated, which is this breaking down of the sea, or the unity, into areas of condensation and rarefaction, fullness and emptiness. Areas of fullness give rise to what's akin for us to existence, and areas of emptiness to this inexistence, empty. Basically they give rise to the field that's felt as the background. So space or time. So in this picture, the state of consciousness is the configuration of filters around one bubble at one scale, the individual scale, or state of individual consciousness would be. And in regard to just one scale of the light, the fire of manifested consciousness. It can go many ways. Maybe it might be very blurry, but the state of consciousness is how you perceive the world at a given time in relation to the phase of life you're in. Meaning you're either awake in a normal state of consciousness, you can be awake in an altered state of consciousness, which, as I mentioned last time, is a very, very dangerous expression. The baseline establishes what's the norm and what's the change, the alterations. But any norm can be, so any baseline can be the norm. If you live in the forest traveling on your own, personal experience I had many times, you're in the jungle. If you move around with what we call the normal state of consciousness, normal configuration of your field of awareness, of attention, perception and all that, if you use the one you use for everyday life in a city or in modern life or whatnot, you're dead, or you won't have a fun time. You'll need a lot of luck to compensate. So what's normal in one context is completely abnormal in another. Hence, the danger of the use of this sentence, altered states of consciousness. We need to establish what is the baseline before we start to use altered. So, most of the time, altered refers to the use of external products to affect directly the workings of the mind, the neurotransmitters. So if we went through the materialistic approach to it, then we would go through the affected chemistry, hence through chemistry the altered biology, how the neurology is affected, what it creates and so on. But it would just be a rendition of an experience using one filter, and using, say, the objective filter. Using the subjective filter, you would have a very, very different perspective in relation to each subject. Although you gave the same dose, you gave the same product, you would have an experience that's vastly different for each person. So that's this idea of the altered states puts into context the idea of the normal state. And the normal state is oftentimes can be thought of as the baseline, the usual or basic configuration in a certain phase of your life. And these basic phases, very broadly, would be the different times of the different experiences you have throughout the day of being awake, being drowsy, then being asleep, and dreaming, and then being in deep sleep without dreams, and then being awake again. When you're awakened, you can have the experience of fusion of your objective circumstances and your subjective, so of what's called the gross state of consciousness, the state that's most prevalent in the awakened state, and fused completely with the subtle state of consciousness, which refers to which is most prevalent during the dreams, but which is filtering, or which is coloring all the experiences that anyone has of the objective. We most of the time do not know the objective apart from the play of the mind. So what the mind is telling us about it through language, through culture, through habits, through desires, through projections and whatnot. So one of the states we mentioned is what happens when you have a split between the subjective and the objective, and when both are looked through a mirror darkly, both are looked at by a witness, neutral witness, by just the screen eventually. So it's the perception of the observer, but at the same time the observer is seldom neutral. There's maybe one observer that's nearly completely neutral, although this observer reflects entirely what touches it, and that would be the screen of the movie theater, which is impacted by these particles of light, but the light is reflected right away, and you would hardly see any track left on the screen. Although at one level, I'm sure you'd find something. So these would be the states referred to the now. When we mention them, like I did, they refer to memory also. So we get into all the complexities of the now as a lived experience in the flow, or the now. So the now as duration, you dove into the flow of things, the flow of time. You feel a lot, but you can analyze nothing. You're part of the things. And time, when you extract yourself, you get out of a river to the bank or to a boat, and then you can start to see from the outside, objectify the river, try to understand it, see where you are as compared to the banks and whatnot, but you feel nearly nothing of what's inside. You're affected. The undercurrents and all the things happening at the bottom or in the river do affect you, but you do not perceive them. You react to them. You're affected by the effects before. Well, when I mentioned that you dive fully into the river, what I mean also in this picture is that you become river, you become fish, you become dragon. You're not an outside object in the river. You're actually part of the river, and you have all the abilities to completely feel what's happening. It doesn't mean that you master the river. You'll still be swallowed by another fish or still die at one point, but you have a very, very acute feeling of the slight changes in pressure, all the game of the currents, you perceive the actual landscape of the bottom and the sides in the way they make the flow go faster or slower. You have this innate knowing of what's happening inside because you're a part of it. When you extract yourself from it and you become human again, and then you analyze to try to understand, to try to master and dominate, make yourself, in Descartes' program, the owner and master of nature, then you can dream about all your mastery and all your understanding, but most of the raw flow of information is lost to you, because most of it would not fit the small categories of the analytical mind. So the analytical mind can classify only things for which it has drawers, it has classes, and if it goes beyond that, or if it's more blurred than that or more fluid than that, then it's lost. So it's not the right tool to embrace unity. It is the right tool to explore plurality and diversity and division. And it is the necessary tool to live through time, not through the everlasting now of felt duration. So it's not that it's a bad thing or that we would have to get rid of it. Getting rid of memory is exactly the same as getting rid of existence. You just erase entirely the story that could happen. You erase the character. If you manage somehow to make all types, all levels of memory disappear, the flow, the reiterated flow of matter, energy, information that you are, that Prigogine called dissipative structure. So the vortex in the bathtub that maintains familiarity of shape while being made all the time of a different matter. So the information remains somehow while matter and energy is changed, is renewed. If you lost memory at this scale, at this level, the shape would dissipate. You would just blend into nothingness. So memory is of the essence. And memory linking to time, linking to all these deep experiences and mysteries and whatnot. Time being in the storyline that I used, time being perceived as this difference in potentials between areas of rarefaction and areas of densification and concentration of potentialities. So, anyhow, that's about it for states. States that are, now there's already a complexity in that the actual name that we could call a state would always be a very, very accurate configuration of filters that make some information of the overall unified field of information appear and others disappear. That would reflect some things and let some go through. let yourself be touched and be shaped, being imprinted by some prehensions, by some interactions with the world, and others where your density would leave no track or leave no memory. At least at the conscious level. And when I say conscious there, I mean that with which the small structure of the I knows, not that with which whole can know, the big consciousness, which would be nearly similar to the unified field of information. All the things that can give shape to something are in many ways synonymous to all the things that can be identified as a track, as a remnant, as an imprinting of a substrate that can be perceived and can be known. The perception in this instance would just be one type of information gathering, information treatment. Perceiving, knowing would be just levels of the same thing in many ways. So now the states in the way the word is used refer to broad categories of commonalities, of usual settings of like the computer we used or the console we used to set the parameters of the music, for instance. So you picture yourself at a concert and you're the one in charge of the sound, and you have all these variables that you can change, and you can, if you find a configuration that is to your liking, or to the liking of a band, or to fitting some type of space, and instead of always being in the present and changing all these parameters in real time, which is a lot of energy spent, you could very well save the settings. You saved big array, big number of different variables. So you preset something and you can re-access it through memory. And when you push the button again, or when something triggers the button, the same configuration then happens again. You open your eyes, and through sheer force of habit, pretty much the same type of experience can happen. But if you tweaked your brain chemistry ever so slightly, even without the use of any external drug, you could generate a vast array of different feelings. And you do generate that if you did not dissociate too much. So oftentimes we get battered and torn by the experience of a river of life, and we use the tools of survival that I mentioned last time: distanciation, differentiation, dissociation, division, and then repression, all the things, projection, pushing away things. All these things we use to try to survive externally and internally. When we do that, we do not wake up with sheer anticipation of the new discovery of this brand new world and brand new life day after day. We wake up into the dream, the great dream, the dream of the dragons. The great dream was a sentence from a role-playing game years back, French role-playing game called Dreams of the Dragons, or Dragon's Dream. And the adventurers were actually, the adventurers and the adventures were just what the dragons were dreaming during their sleep. And the time between the adventures, so the time that you do not actually role-play your character, were described as the grey dreams. So it's a dream, foggy, leaving no tracks. When I started to travel and got out of this very, very long period that felt to me like a long grey dream that covered a long time in my youth. So when I started to, I was trying to jump out of a ball, but say at the end of my late 16s, early 17s, I left and I jumped out of a ball and jumped out of the great dream. And then I would play my adventures. I would leave the dragon's dream for a while, and then later I would have to go back and work or do something like this. And although work was still another adventure, another discovery, a dive in the social world, after a while it was felt like great dream. The same for looking for work, or many parts of it were still shimmering with the recollection of what the adventure was, but over time I would lose this feeling of being alive. And I still do, to this day, get parameters differentiated between some types of experience, although now I do have the actual lived experience and knowledge that I am actually deciding on the parameters, and I can go back, I can switch from this preset auto setting mode to the flow mode, to the non-preset, the lived mode, which is this messy tweaking of variables into the now, or even to something that's beyond, which is plugging directly, removing the controller and plugging directly the control to the music, to the flow around. So connecting or blending the flow and the music, which is what we call flow, or one aspect of what we call intuition in Bergson's terms. Access to not only the raw flow of data, but the raw flow of action, the being in the river of time and things. As a fish does not only mean that you perceive things, it means that you're directly pushed by changes in pressure and things like this that are made without your knowing. You're directly into it. And so that's another approach to it. So, drifting and rambling again. The matter with states is, if it refers to the etymology of the verb to be, and if being refers to being in the present, then states is misleading. And there we get to part of what we call states of consciousness, would be these settings of consciousness that we could call structures. They're constructions of ways of perceiving the world or ways of being into the world. And as we saw, we see big differences between the various phases of the day, the conscious, unconscious, subconscious. When we're daydreaming, we're not really there and whatnot. But if you zoomed in a bit more, you would have a massive array of differences of classes, and then each would be actually manifested in a unique way by each person or each being at any given time. So the structures of consciousness would be something more like these lasting settings of parameters of how to know, and with what we know, who knows, how we know, what knowing we do. So the structures of consciousness, as Gebser describes them, are the structures mostly of the I. They are the I of consciousness, of the science. At the same time, as mentioned, consciousness does not limit itself. It's not only the doing of something. It is also the subject that is doing the knowing and the object that is the known. All those are split apart by the dissection of the language, but as soon as you reconcile them out of the language, they're just one and the same. The language and the analytical mind are useful to separate things so that you can, once you've identified different buttons and different parameters that you can affect on your control console, you can consciously act upon them. Prior to that, all things are made on autopilot, which means that the small consciousness, the consciousness of the I, the reflexive consciousness, the consciousness that sees itself being conscious, has no say or no ability to do anything about it. So these structures are they're the lasting parameters of the I, but when we mention the I, they predefine the definition of the self. Will by a reflection define the otherness, define alterity, hence define what is to be perceived, the world, the others. If the self is defined as the universe, there is no, or as infinity, there's no otherness, there's no others to differentiate from. So this would be the experience of oneness in diversity. If you had the feeling of the one, the primal unity, you'd see yourself as split in parts, including infinity, emptiness, and all these defined concentrations of potentialities of beingness. And you could see yourself from the level of the part, looking at either smaller parts and perceiving oneself as a whole, which is what we do when we consider the entire body-mind as one, or the entire diversity of our subjective identities as one. When we zoom in, we'll see many voices, many emotions, many roles, many things that IFS, for instance, will call parts, or voice dialogue will call voice, others will call alters, or we call them demons, emotions. If a small part is looking at the bigger whole, if it's looking at whatever greater scale of unity or greater scale of parts, then it sees a medium, or it sees a system it is interacting in with others at the same scale. So the structures of consciousness are accretions of potentialities that create a stronger experience of differentiation. When with the story of a bubble, the more thick the layers of a bubble, and somehow the bigger, and it wouldn't even be the bigger, it would be the more concentrated the layer defining the bubble, the more it will feel identity inside and alterity outside. But even this would not actually cover the full spectrum of the experience, because many times we feel more familiar, or more closeness to what's outside of us than to what's inside of us. Oftentimes we'll see people say or do things that deeply resonate with the core of us, so with parts of us, or with the inner structure, or with something quite strong in us. But still, what we will do and say at this given time will be something that comes from a protective structure, so for protective part of ourselves, that maybe will not resonate with a lot of the other parts of ourselves, or with what we would identify as the core of it, the self, which we'll see later. But so these structures, if I barely have the intuition of differentiation, then I get into the archaic. There's the feel of being, but it's pretty much undifferentiated. It's being in the midst of something. It's the experience in Stanislas Grof's work of the first experience of a child inside the womb. The first perinatal matrix. This experience can be very peaceful and very soothing, and so you blended into a notion of beingness that supports you and that loves you. And then it can be very traumatic because you can be in a sea of torment. You can be in hell if you were not desired, if your world is being poisoned because your mother is being intoxicated or by consumption of products. It could be by herself, but it could be just products that are brought through the food, toxic pollutants and things like this. And it could be by the toxicity and the pollutants that are brought by our senses, by the lived experience, traumatic experience, or lack of beauty, lack of hope, lack of lust for life. So all these would be at one level or another poison that would seep into the entire universe that the mother has defined for its inhabitants, be it microbiota, cells, and the cells that will multiply to become the newborn, future newborn. So at this level of indifferentiation, there is not yet a structure that's able to perceive self and other and objectify. Self creating a subject, other creating an object, and the in-between creating the relationships or the interactions, the actions that can be done to the outer world, that we can be submitted to, or that can be co-created or at least mediated, interacted between both. So the archaic structure would be the global setting, both at the level of the individual and the level of, the collective, and the level of the species or whatever scale of definition you use. It is defined by this lack, because when we say that the child is the mother at this level, there is already a layer that is being imprinted. There's already a substrate that is being marked and that carries memory prior to reflexive consciousness. So that's why it is such what happens during the perinatal phases is of such importance later on. And these are just the phases of the personal level and the material level. So we could picture, we could transpose and find the same things at many different levels and in the energetic, at all scales of size, all scales of time. So you could have catastrophes affecting the entire world at a given time and rippling effects shaping the mother and shaping the newborn at the same time. You could have species appearing or differentiating into a time of very strong catastrophe again, a very strong felt sense of danger, of not being loved, not being included, not being welcome. So from there you'd have several, you already have an inkling of, you have a spark of consciousness, of differentiated consciousness into the archaic. Prior would be, it's not the archaic, it's a it's non-defined. It's absolute unity, undifferentiated, or it's the sea of emptiness, infinite potentialities, or unexpressed, or lack of any potentialities amongst all the potentials of a Wuji, the undefined infinite. So when we get to the structure corresponding to the magical is what's akin to the first feeling of differentiation. So say you'd have many in-betweens, like all systems, like chakra systems, like any system. The number of parts you end up with depends entirely on the zoom and the choice. Which part you decide to keep, which part you decide to remove or to forget or not to see. So when we get from the archaic to the magical, there's this initiatory experience of the fall, the split, the living out of the protective womb of paradise, and the being thrown into the burning light with the oxygen filling the lungs and burning, oxidizing everything, and the differences in pressure and whatnot that are felt through touch. And prior to that, the dire straits of the passage through the birthing canal, with the contractions, with all the potential, the life-supporting part of your environment. Not environment would be the things that are around you. So once again, it's not a very good word. So your milieu, your medium, what you're in the middle of and what's in the middle of you. This turns against you. So when the mother loses the water, the life-supporting medium and protective medium is running thin, is being carried away. You're losing your resources. You're losing your world. And you're pushed outside. You're welcome no longer. And this is a very, very fraught with many potentialities of trauma, once again. Trauma being a memory of something that could hurt you, or that did hurt you. And it's in many ways a tool to actualize the learnings of this time period. You survived it if you still have memory, and so the trauma is a way to make sure that if you put your head into the mouth of the tiger and somehow survived, you will have a strong experience of what you felt at that time, and you will reactivate some of the reflexes or some of the reactions you had at the time. And you do that because somehow you lived. So it is thought that once again the control has this control. You could try again to navigate through all the parameters and pilot the hero the way you want, but it's always difficult and complex. You have so many parameters, so many things can go wrong. So you do have a strong interest, at least both energetically and maybe evolutionarily, in recording the things that worked and starting from there. At the same time, unfortunately, it's also what kills you, because living in trauma means living in memory, re-actualizing the things that hurt us, and the responses we could muster at a given time may not be suited at all to the new conditions, and then the triggers that alert us and reactivate these presettings and these memories, they do not fit the exact conditions we're in most of the time. We can be triggered by just small parts that look the same, while the actual thing is completely nearly the opposite. Can be triggered into a fight or flight situation, but actually it's a joke, or it's actually something beneficial for me. But just one part of it, one cue from my sensorium made me think of this, and back I go. But if I had it's the same big paradox of memory. Without memory, nothing exists. With absolute memory, if there is no difference between the tracks and the actual event or the thing happening, then there is no potentiality for time or for anything. I could not differentiate my memory from my present. The same would go for imagination. If I create an imagination projection of the imaginal world into reality that is so strong that I cannot differentiate, it will be very difficult to survive. And the same goes for, we complain all the time about our amazing technology. We complain that we forget things, but if we reversed the situation and if we kept perfect memories of all the things that we see, and in some ways it's thought that we do keep them, but we keep them below consciousness, below the small consciousness of the I. But it's the I doing the complaining, because he cannot access all this and cannot know everything, and hence cannot get the feeling that he controls everything through the past, which is a massive delusion. But still, if memory was perfect, we would not exist. If we have no memory, we cannot exist as differentiated people. We arise and disappear. The sweet spot in between allows us to access memory and to forget it when we don't use it, or we don't need it. Some memories are of more importance than others. Memories of all the things that could kill us or that nearly did kill us, or the things that destroyed us physically, emotionally, energetically, whatnot. So for those memories, it could be thought that trauma is a strong way to alert to similar situations, then to predispose to responses that at least worked once, prior, when we imprinted this situation in our minds. We survived. or we would not have the situation, the memory. So this is, as all technology, as everything actually, it is a very, very useful trick that has a lot of shadows. If my say that I tweaked the trauma down and made them nearly disappear, which you see sometimes with people with no fear. No fear, you have no recollection of something that puts the brake on what you're trying to do. This is not a situation that makes you live a very long time, oftentimes. You push and push and push until you reach the limit, and at the limit, most of the time you die. Or you discover fear, and somehow you discover this imprint of trauma, or just at least the emotion. Trauma is the next level. It's the way to never forget what nearly destroyed you, or what was really detrimental to your inner being. So when we reach this stage of birth, the actual separation from the mother, the origin, we find ourselves alone in a foreign world that is not as benevolent, not as warm, maybe not as agreeable. But if things go okay, and we did not get crushed too much or didn't get too traumatized during the initiatory experience, we're reunited with the mother, but as a differentiated being. But we become part of her body again when she holds her on her bottom. Now the problem described by Groff is that our ways of thinking appropriate the world and shape it, not through the lived experience of the now, but through the categories of the mind that are created and the memories. And not only the traumatic memories, we can hurt the world and ourselves in many different ways using all our precious knowledge. So in the 50s, for instance, it was common practice to take the child and put it on a scale, metal scale. So the metal would be quite cold in many parts of the world. Not really the type of feeling that the child is nearly programmed to feel or is looking for in his genetic memory or the specie memory past the initiatory test. There is this reward normally. And now the reward is in metal and cold and being treated as an object. And then if you're lucky, you get back to the reunion with the mother. But if you're unlucky and you're too frail or whatnot, then you put into the machinery of the world that will try to make you survive, while giving you the feeling of being forsaken, or of not deserving to live, or of being just a cog in the machine. You do not know at the time what a cog is, do not know what a machine is, but still. The magic structure is not the setting that appears there, so that would still be oftentimes included into the archaic. And quite often say Wilber mentions the archaic as a level, and mentions the first 6 months of life, due to most of so it's thought that you have no memory. It was thought for a long time, at least, because we could not find the neural capabilities. But then you get into a huge topic of where is memory, what is the substrate, and where is it stored. But no matter, for now we just need to remember that the archaic is often depicted as the setting that configurates consciousness at the very early age also. Although you started to be fully differentiated as a body, you're an outside body from your origin point, but still you're not you have not constructed a sufficient high or sufficient structure of identity and differentiation so that you could subjectively perceive yourself as different. So there's this idea, objectively from the outside you're already a separate being. From the inside you're not necessarily. But then again, you have, if you zoom into the real diversity of situations that did arise in all the time the humans have been around, you find everything. But since what we register is just the baseline, a lot of the out of the common experiences are just wiped out. They're renormalized, and then they're negated once we postulate that the medium experience, the average experience, which is just a construct, no one lived the average experience. But if you make a composite picture of many rhythms, many lives, you'll get to an average. And around you have all the scales of variation. So you would find all the different words, norm, and so on, that you'd find in statistics. But the thing is, each individual experience is unique, and when the statistics, the way of making sense of what was or what is already what was once you're trying to register it, by simplifying the data, by taking majority of events or the very average events, averaging out any tool that you can use to treat the amount of data you have. If it starts to erase the individual lived experience, then you really deeply express the shadow of your tool, the shadow of statistics. So the magical structure corresponds to the time when the individuality starts to rise, but it does not arise first as a differentiated I. It is not confused, but it is sort of blended in the we of the nuclear family around. The nuclear family being the experience now. other cultures, other times, other species, you would have very different experiences. But the first, say that for a while, the individual human being or individual mammal, the newborn, although developing into a puppy, into a child or whatnot, gains autonomy of movement somehow, but would still not be able to survive on its own. So for all this period when it could completely not survive on its own, it perceives itself as part of the we before being part of an I. It is as much part of its mother. It's completely fed the world by the role modeling of the mother or the important persons around. So it's all these are characteristics of the magical structure, oftentimes tied to the tribe, for instance, the tribal not instinct, but the inability to survive without the others is something that would still be felt in most of the experiences of hunter-gatherers for a long, long time. The meaning of existing on your own would be maybe small. You would not live a long time, and it would be mostly a feeling, if it did exist strongly, it was mostly a feeling shared by males, lonely males, in between. Females by nature, by the fact that they carry the offspring, and females of mammals have to care for the offspring for a stretch. So by nature they assimilate to we and to a tribe, and the survival is completely reliant on these units of family, however big or small they be. So now the mythic structure arises out of this condensation of matter, energy, information, both at the individual level and at the collective level, when the inner life starts to appear. So when the individual actually is birthed as a subjective identity, differentiated from the whole, but differentiated also from the we. So when you are not your parents anymore, you get into the mythic. When the bubble is not only feeling that it exists out of the ocean amongst bubbles, but when it feels that it has an inner life that differentiates it from all other bubbles too, then it's the start of the mythic structure, the settings of perceiving the world that allow for this type of experience. So here we start to see the complexity of differentiating states, the way they're used, relate to common patterns of experiencing the world. Structures refer to common patterns of perceiving the world. Normally, they are not at the same scale. So it would be harmonics of the same notes. So the archaic as a state, as a structure, as a level, whatnot, would be harmonics, would be resonating, because they would share many, many commonalities. But they are not at the same scale. The structure would be tied to a greater scale of duration, of size. The state is, however lengthy or habitual, it's supposed to be at a smaller scale. And now what about the levels? Because that's one big thing that I was arguing last time. I'm not by far the only one having misgivings about it. Is the confusion that can be made, and that is actively made consciously or unconsciously by Wilber, while using the term levels and then using the term structures, and not clearly differentiating between both. So the levels refer to levels of development. The states are lived because the activities that are carried through call for a different setting of the parameters of consciousness. So your control is tweaked a different way. To use this analogy, or to use the analogy of the filters, in these different situations you filter different things for different functions, different uses. Now the developmental study of things is the study of how they grow into their mature form. And there is a preset memory of how a being will come into its full expression. And this preset memory is quite stable. This is actually very commonly phases of embryology, for instance, would phases of cellular division. You do not go from 1 cell to 20 right away. You will have to go through the various stages of a blastula and so on. So now the problem with levels is that it carries with it so the idea of a linear developmental journey, the idea of a preset existing mature being at the end, and then it carries with it for many the idea that the mature form is better in many ways, is the completed form of the being, while its earlier developmental stages are immature or are incomplete. And this tied to the philosophical history and sociological history of the Western world carries with it a lot of secondary ideas. So Wilber is quite actually sad somehow, because it's a very necessary thinker in some ways. He's done huge work and very timely, very needed. That is the same as any others. And for instance, it's even recent, I was reading his last book, so it's the same story repeated, but the matter is not so much that he repeats a story to give it flesh and to make it turn it into a reality, which I do understand. The matter is that you start to see in his books after a while more and more of the isms that are categorizations, often pejorative categorization of groups of people or of thinking. So you find references to the leftist whatnot, and this for a thinker of the integral is very problematic. Same due to what he experienced in the academia in the US, the backlash, the resistance to his work, or the attacks and whatnot. He started to side with, or to identify, or to maybe not identify, but to alienate parts of the others that did not carry forth his right ideas, upper layers of evolution and whatnot. And all this is quite problematic for a couple of philosophical reasons. So when Gebser describes the structures of consciousness, he is very careful in his use of words to make sure that they are not thought of as stages or as developmental phases that could be assigned to a value judgment. So Gebser is a traveler. He's lived the rise of Nazi Germany. He has lived through the effects of self not imposed but self-decided value systems that you superimpose on the world, and from the time you've decided that such or such criteria is inferior, you justify your crushing of them for the greater good of civilization, of spreading progress, of spreading your religion or whatnot. So you can very well be a strong imperialist and power monger or whatever integrist. You decide that in your mythical or magical structure of thinking, the inside of your bubble, of your personal bubble, of your collective bubble, differentiates you completely from the outside, with which you have no relationship of debt. You owe it nothing. You do not owe it reverence or respect or anything. The inside, the focus of attention, the center of your universe is not now the the collective around you or whatnot. It is inside of you. And the inside can be perceived as a war against the outside. So it wouldn't matter what Wilbur is free to think whatever as any other person. The only problem is articulating the integral as one of its most active and publicized proponent, and expressing in a recurrent manner the type of judgments that are identified with layers in his own systems, layers that are way down from the integral that he's striving for, is actually producing a negative effect. I do get, I'm not in academia, I've never been, I'm not in anything actually, so I've been the witness, the eye going through, but I've worked somehow in different fields, even in research somehow, but as an outsider all the time. I deeply understand the emotional feeling of seeing the things that you deem vital for many being despised, being pushed away, and not even being given a chance to express what they could do or better themselves, and just by sheer force of habit or vested interest being brushed aside. That's the experience that nearly all individuals get when their inner treasure is thrown to the dump. And it's oftentimes an experience we get very young. But if you found your treasure, if you found the gift you were given and you can give others, which is your expression into this world, very often it's quite frustrating to have it, to express it, to materialize. For Wilbur, it reached a point where it spread massively, like his books were read broadly, and then he felt a strong resistance, like a closing up. And he felt the closing up not only from maybe what, like the sides he would have expected to react to at first, but he felt it from the sides which were supposed to be realized. And this is an unpleasant experience. And since it lasted a long time, and what he calls a pluralist relativist narrative structure or level of consciousness, in his word, since it spread widely into a field of academia at one point, he felt after a while that it was somehow the enemy. And you find it also in many ways. You find it expressed with much more subtlety, or maybe not. The theme did not rise directly, but you still find it in people like Keelan Morgan. the ridiculing of the postmodernist thinking, or the more recent ecology philosophies. And oftentimes, when it is expressed as main problem is not oppositions of ideas or conflicts, which are both unavoidable and provide the dynamics of things. So they're both unavoidable and in many ways necessary as the alliances, symbiosis, and whatnot. You do the interplay of these forces are what pushes things to change and to actually regulate. So my issue with thinkers that are at the forefront of the integral is only that somehow you need to be more careful. The integral you're pushing becomes very fast another tribe. And when I say you, it means nothing. I don't consider myself in any way superior. I do not have lessons to give to anybody. But as one person who benefited, I was echoing in my own way through completely different experiences these intuitions of the integral through the integration of various experience in society, various layers of experiences in the social world, as work or as status or whatnot, and experiences in the natural world, in the cultural world, the traveling and so on. And my type of traveling, say traveling afoot alone or hitchhiking, was the way of weakness. So you put yourself into a state where you're weaker than anything around you. So you get to the very poor countries, but in many ways you're poorer, or at least you look poorer and live poorer than the poorest around you. Maybe not the poorest, but many of the relative poor. And so from this taking the low side, you get access to what others can do or be, to what the best of others can do and or be, when they are not debased, or they are not judged, or and you get access to the wealth of all sorts of people. You get picked up hitchhiking by very rich people describing how the area that you to my sensibilities was destroyed looked like money to the guy, but still out of the fact that the person is helping you and that the person through the interaction is obviously the same as you in many ways, a human being, and you can read the cracks, you can feel the gifts too, however clumsily expressed sometimes. There's a very, very, very different experience in meeting people where they are, and just seeing the beauty or seeing the value of whatever it is that they have completed or crafted, or someone can be a master at siesta, at just being lazy. You meet people like that sometimes. And now it is very rare, but in the Caribbean or in some hot countries with some conditions where you'd have an old fisherman, and the lifestyle being relatively easy, and you'd meet someone smoking his joints and hanging in his hammock. He would not need to smoke his joint or a cigarette or whatnot, but as like the lived experience would be more akin to this. And this person is impersonating rest or relaxation. Relax, let go, let be. And they impersonate it so strongly that it creates a field around them. And just from seeing them or approaching them, then much more interacting or communicating with them, you get relaxed, you slow down, you drop your concerns. If you had any traveling, you get quite strong at letting go too. So you have people who have done nothing, have completed nothing, have reached no level in the rat race or in the hierarchy of society, and they can still have completed a very, very high level of something that is very deep, very necessary. Someone can be a master at medieval craft or prehistoric craft from prehistory, like crafting stones or lighting fire, which is very, very useful and fun. So now, obviously, you can find many tools to do in absolute judgment. You can make an industrial tool that would be thousands of times more, maybe more lasting, more efficient for the task and whatnot. Millions of times more higher technology, higher level of technology. But this level idea is something that in real life becomes very, very tricky. Saying that the hunter-gatherers are a lower level of consciousness because of a way of perceiving the world, and that their so-called magical beliefs are just stories for children that are comparable to the Santa Claus stories we tell our kids, and that we know are lies, but are helpful lies, or the stories where until 10 or so in the cartoons all animals are sentient, all animals are alive and communicate, and then all of a sudden it's finished and the animals are just moving machines in the storyline of a great part of the 20th century, depicting the tribes like this, depicting the magic like this, depicting the ways of perceiving the world is not, it's not just an approximation, it's actually a deep, deep mistake. It is. It feels so deeply to anyone having been exposed to the shimmering complexities and the infinite variety and diversity of the world. It feels wrong to see people who are impersonating the intelligence and the striving towards expansion or intensification of any capability, be it only intelligence or even more consciousness, and to read depictions that are so weak in many ways and so short-sighted. But not short-sighted meaning that either you never met the people or the experiences or whatnot, or you met them from a standpoint where you had decided already what you were seeing. You saw them from the top of your 4x4 of your big Jeep, or you didn't live in the same world. And I didn't live long in the world of any tribe, because I lived as a loner in the outskirts of, in between nature and the human world, and not fully immersed in nature either for long periods of time on my own. I didn't go for the full experience of removing myself from. I had attractions towards it, but I had stronger attraction, other parts of me calling for an attempt to interact with the human world, however pathetic I found it many times, without, once again, with personal judgment, which at the same time is no absolute judgment. People live by their own terms. The fact that aesthetically and morally or ethically or whatnot it doesn't suit me doesn't affect the. I do not judge the persons. I can judge the lifestyles and things like this, but as an abstraction, when I meet people, when I'm with people as a constant traveler, because even settled, when I'm settled, I'm still the traveler after so long. But I will not have judgment of do not even have judgments of lifestyles. There's a differentiation between the taste I have for something and an absolute judgment where it is bad in the absolute. I dislike it. I would feel or think that it's bad for such or such reasons to me, but I would not make it an absolute. In that, I am fully the bad expression of the green, unable to see the green meme being the narrative of a really pluralist relativist. But what Wilber brought, what Gebser brought, and Gebser had this experience of living in different cultures, being the weak one, meeting the people where they are trying to find beauty in and openness and carefulness of not confusing the diversity of the structures of consciousness with any ranking. In many aspects, you change the amount of extrasomatic energy available. You remove electricity and petroleum for a short period of time, and you will see if the high levels of consciousness that you deem expressed around you are maintained long. They are in many ways, you are a part of your world. You're stuck into the roots of your world, into your world predefines what you can access to. As John Churchill, which is maybe more careful in his and both more careful and much more respectful maybe of say the magical structure than Wilber will be. And once again, I'm not criticizing Wilber. I do not know the reason why he's doing it. He might be doing it to appeal to the majority thinking and find the commonalities that allow communication. Still, to me, it is like still manning one's position while straw manning all others' positions, especially the ones that are the most adverse to your ideas and point of view, is weak integral. As mentioned prior, the integral striving, apart from any brand, any peculiar or specific writer, even if you include in this integral striving these recreations of unity through time, while you do have the process of differentiation, diversification, and so you break down the landscape more and more, but you recreate again and again through various type of symbiosis, social alliances and whatnot. You recreate bigger unities, bigger structures of internal relationships. This process, you could think that all the different structures of consciousness are part of these cycles, and they are all like functional parts, the same way you'd find in if you were describing a process and starting with it needs a beginning, it needs a middle, it needs an end. Or if you use what I mentioned last time with a tool like Life Cycle of Organization by George Lund, with formation, normation, transformation, interspaced with storms, or in his name breakpoints, turning points in other names, crisis, and performance times, sweet spot times of performance of the system, past the completion of some of the initiation rituals, you pass the crisis together, and for a time it creates a stronger unity that will break down over time due to diversification. But so it is more to be true to the depth of their calling and the depth of their message but I think some of the integral philosophers would benefit, maybe, but maybe not. So yeah, the integral, I defined it at first with the name itself. The integrality, integrative, what is untouched, and untouched branching back to what is what includes everything, the unity that has not been touched, to remove part of it or to alienate part of it. So what includes what the system or machinery that has not been touched, that has not been made unable to work with all the different parts that were included. And then the state of being integral, being undamaged, uncorrupted, and so on. And then we got to the deeper meaning that Gebser puts behind the integral, which as a structure of consciousness is not only an inclusion, which would be what we find in the late mental structure, like in what's called the green or relativist pluralist period or narrative, is this re-inclusion of all the different parts. And maybe in late approaches with system theories and complexity theories, network theories, and so on, you get to the idea of how to make things work together, at least as a striving or as an idea. So the integral for Gebser is not only this, it's not only including, not only making things work together, not only maintaining the health of things by not breaking them apart, not severing them from their needed nets of relationships, web of communications. It is linked to this idea of transparency and diaphaneity, which I contrasted with a few antonyms like opacity, with obscurity, concealment, and then expanding into the semantic fields, we would get to the opposite of transparency in a political system, for instance, would be concealment based on secrecy, but the secrecy would there be based most likely on corruption, on dishonesty. So the transparency and diaphaneity prior to the integral would still be found in what's so deeply criticized now, for some reasons that can be understood, but the absolute welcoming of all parts, of all the diversity, in its own terms, the way it's done with parts in IFS, but expanded into the parts of the society, not negating the errors of the behaviors or things that can be done, but as an absolute, with a postulate that there is no bad part All parts are welcome. And all parts are burdened. There's a difference between the behavior and the core beingness. So this is a system, whatnot. Let's not go through it, but this there's a part of the diaphaneity that comes with making oneself so fragile or so thin that there is, as Bob Dylan used to say, when you get nothing to lose. You're invisible now. You get nothing to conceal. So there's one part of it in the integral. You have been washed away by the experience of life, and you do not have anything to hide outside. You can be at home with the darkness and the light, with the horrors and the death and all that. It does not mean that you have to like it. It does not mean that you will not fight it, but you can be with it. You're not in reaction. You can be in co-creation. And at the same time, you're transparent to what's inside. You do not need to hide the many aspects of your brokenness or your light or your burning self. The core that reveals all the parts around, that is akin to an empty space where people that can gather in a circle can see each other due to this emptiness in the center. But this emptiness, if it's not lit by the sunlight or by a fire, you would not even know that you're one with all the others. You would not even see them. So you need the light of consciousness and you need it to go through. You need the emptiness so that the light can spread, and so that the light can be reflected, and thus display all the boundless forms most beautiful, that are the dancing flames of the self-fire. So, well, that's it for now. Maybe, I don't know if I made things any clearer, but who knows? Maybe we'll get back to it.